Good morning, good afternoon. If you're perhaps watching this on a recording later, good evening, maybe. Um, Very pleased to have an opportunity to talk to Marlon and Jack today. Marlon McFate from Cohesity, Field CTO for Public Sector, and Jack Bailey from 1111 Systems, a VP of Enablement, both great partners of ours. And we think we have a pretty interesting conversation today. It's going to be a little different type of webinar. We're not going to just bore you with slideware. We try to have a conversation about a pretty important topic, which is cyber recovery, cyber resiliency, as we think about it. In particular, how that impacts public sector organizations, which is sometimes a little different than it does commercial organizations. So we're going to start with a little bit of intros and maybe chat a little bit about some of the things that we're all seeing in our customers, and then Marlon and Jack have some interesting content to talk about around how Cohesity and 11 Systems can really create a really powerful and really complete cyber resiliency strategy for public sector organizations. So I'll go first briefly. My name is Bill Cassidy. I'm our CTO for IT Partners. And Marlon and Jack, if you just want to give a couple of seconds about what you guys do, and then we'll just get into some chatting.
Absolutely. So, as you said, Bill, my name is Marlon McFate. I'm the CTO and CISO for public sector at Cohesity. And my responsibilities kind of range, almost schizophrenic, right? On one side, it's what is the art of the possible. The other side is, how can it hurt us? And, what should we and should we not, attempt to do? But I work with our customers both from consulting in, technology, ours and others. We have quite a few partners such as 1111. And then on the other side, consulting with public sector customers on, how they should change their methodologies, that kind of stuff. And I'll turn it over to Jack because I have a tendency to talk too long.
No worries.
Jack Bailey, great to join you. As Bill mentioned, my role here is VP of Enablement. My background, though, is about 20 years of technical leadership and data protection. So I had the pleasure for the past 2 decades of doing data protection, recovery, and cyber. And then these days, I work with our channel and sales teams at 1111 to hear customer challenges and figure out how we can resolve and solve those at the end of the day. So, Bill, Marlon, great to be with you.
Likewise.
Excellent. Excellent. So I think it's really interesting that we have both Cohesity and 1111, both great partners of ours and with our customers, because just to go into what we're seeing in the field, and I'll let you guys kind of comment on some of the stuff as well, right? Which is it really focuses on a few specific challenges, right? One of the things that we see a lot of is that the focus around cyber in the bigger sense, right, tends to get directed at what I call prevention or front end, right, which is a very important function and a very important capacity that organizations need to pay attention to when it comes to being secure. And I think about things in terms of just everything from firewalling to endpoint protection to awareness and SIMs and monitoring and all the things that go into trying to prevent the event from happening in the first place, which is always better than having the event, right? But it does lend itself to the what we call finishing it, right, or the back end of a cyber resiliency strategy, maybe not getting as fully baked out, right? You guys seeing similar things when you talk to customers?
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think, Bill, one of the great terms you used there is the term cyber resilience. The way that I like to talk to our teams and customers as well is thinking of cyber resilience, as you just mentioned, really in two parts. You have to think that there's the prevention element of it, which is critical, as you mentioned, but also the recovery and response piece of it as well, right? So some organizations out there, especially in the public sector, may align to CGIS, or I'm sorry, NIST. They may have CGIS as a compliance requirement, but NIST may be something that they align to, right? And anyone who's familiar with that sort of guidelines would say, hey, I need to identify and protect. Those are critical, but my response and recovery mechanisms are critical as well. And I know we'll talk later on about it, Bill, and I'm sure Marilyn has some thoughts as well. But just the sheer rate of infection and reinfection these days, organizations have to have that response covered.
Right.
Yeah. So I agree wholeheartedly with what Jack has said. I do think of it slightly differently. If you take a look at the Webster's Dictionary, the word resiliency, they give a material science definition for it. It's basically how far can a material bend before it can not snap back to its original shape. And so I really think of, to your point, Jack, the identify, detect, protect, if we're using NIST as an example here. And I have some statistics in the deck a little bit later on, but 80% of an organization in public sector, 80% of their budgets go toward that end of the spectrum. But I think there's also additional other issues. One, when I ask customers to describe cyber resiliency to me, they usually give me a worst case disaster recovery scenario, right? That's what they think of as cyber resiliency. So we need to get away from this idea that a cyber incident is basically a worst case disaster. They're entirely different. Like what we need to do to
Yeah.
recover from that has many additional steps. And unfortunately, cybersecurity teams don't go through this on a daily basis, despite what the news says, right? And so they don't
Yeah.
necessarily have the muscle memory, so there are ways to get around that, and we'll talk about that,
Yeah, that was something I was going to mention too, Marlon, is that we definitely see um, some customers looking at the efforts they've made around planning for DR, which are admirable, um, and saying, I will simply use that as my, like you say, your worst case scenario, or I can adapt that to being a cyber resiliency plan. And there are so many things, as I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit, right, that are different in the event of a cyber event than in DR. And it generally starts with, in DR, you just hope you have a copy of your data. And in cyber, you may have copies of it, but you may not trust any single one of them.
and
And that's,
trust is the
you know,
yeah, trust is the big problem, right? A DR situation, you trust everything that's in your backup.
mhm.
Cyber, you don't. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Yep.
interrupt.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, and that's what we see as the challenge is you may have excellent copies of data
Mhm.
and that they are complete, but they're possibly all infected.
Yeah.
And how do you work through that? A DR doesn't assume that. DR assumes like I just need to get the data recovered into services so I can present them back to the organization. So we definitely are seeing that. And I think both of you guys touched on something that we also see, which is it's much more difficult to do. It's difficult to do DR testing at all, but it's much more difficult to do a true cyber resiliency or cyber recovery test. And and a lot of that is around both process and that normally these things don't occur at convenient times. And
Mhm.
and so it can be a staffing challenge as well. Either you don't have the team itself because you're shorthanded, which is very common in public sector organizations, or that due to the scenario unrolling at a particular time, the team you expected to have you don't have, right? And so not having the ability to rely on others in the event of a cyber event is can be a challenge, right? And I think Jack, we're able to talk a little bit during your session on how Lebanon can really help extend a customer's team in both DR and CR situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Oh, after you, Marlon, please.
I was gonna say I actually left out some of those parts because I know Jack is going to talk about them. So I'm looking forward to it. Go ahead, Jack.
Cool.
Yeah, and I was going to say we'll touch on that in a minute, but just some statistics that come to mind is our organization, 1111, did a survey of 1,000 organizations just recently, and a staggering thing, I think it aligns to what you're saying, Bill, is 81% of people that came back when I said, "Hey, what is your thoughts of your organization's ability on cyber recovery in particular?"
Mhm.
81% of them said dramatically overconfident or somewhat overconfident on it. I think it goes back to what you're saying as well of as we go through the presentation, the conversation today, it's really a matter of understanding what is it I'm trying to recover from. And to your point, I know depending on the audience, this may be somewhat high level, but when I explain to a new hire or a new customer, I often think of disaster recovery in the sense of having another environment to power your data or applications. But as you mentioned before, if that data and applications is in a state that's not clean, not right to run in the environment, no number of copies is going to do anything on that.
Right.
So the ability for an organization who a lot in the public sector obviously think of cyber as the number one risk or top two risks that they're looking to mitigate from, but so often don't have a specific recovery strategy or specific recovery process for that as well. So again, look forward to diving further into that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, the only other
absolutely.
thing, one more thing I'll just add to that is something we see both in commercial and in public sector, right? And I think both you guys are going to talk on this as well, is in a DR situation, IT is still in control, right? IT is the driver for the data recovery process. They probably have built the DR plan. They're the ones doing the communicating back to the organization. That's very different often in a cyber event where IT is part of a team, but that's a security issue now, and possibly even a police issue or a federal level issue about depending on who the actors were that made this cyber event happen. They may not be in control, right? So the responsibility has shifted dramatically, and IT may not have as much ability to influence how the outcomes are delivered. And so we really think about how does a good cyber resiliency plan from a service standpoint integrate into an overall organization's security plan from a cyber event. So that's a little different as well. So I think what we have outlined here is that there's quite a bit of difference between declaring a DR event and having a great plan for it and being able to successfully declare a cyber event and recover in a reasonable period of time, if at all. So Marlon, why don't I turn it over to you at this point, and you can jump into some of the topics you want to talk about, and Jack and I will be unable to contain ourselves, and we'll comment thoroughly through it.
All right. Yeah, because if we keep talking, I won't have a deck. Hold on one second. Let me share my deck real quick.
It's not a webinar till the slides are up anyway.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we could probably talk about this for hours, so we should probably get started. Let me just move the little video window there. All right, everyone see my thing? All right, so I'm going to cover down because I have a feeling I know a lot of what Jack is going to talk about. I'm going to cover down on cyber resiliency, kind of, I think, give a better definition or my personal definition of cyber resiliency, and then also, why it's important and what are some of the things that we need to start thinking about. These aren't just technology changes. Some of these are methodology changes, how to think about things. Real quick, just so if anyone on the call doesn't know who Cohesity is, I'm going to give the very short version of this. We've been around for 12 or 13 years. We actually just joined with Veritas. So it's a combination of those two companies. Basically makes us the largest data management, secondary data, backup recovery, data security, data insights company in the world or in the market at this point in time. But that's what we started off as, was a backup and recovery company. Prior to 2015, 2016, when ransomware started becoming a really big thing. And we aim to become basically the number one or the best in breed at the very least in the backup recovery and data security space. And those are those two bottom bars. That's kind of where the competitive landscape, though, ended, right? We started asking questions as opposed to it being in the infrastructure side of the house, like Bill, you said, and just saying, hey, this is a DR tool, and we're just putting data away for something tragic to happen. We were also like, hey, there's a lot of data in there. How can we start getting additional value out of that? And so that's mobility, access, and insights. We're not going to talk about those today, but start thinking about, like, how do I, find the data for AI projects or for generative AI or RAG or machine learning, all those good things. But then also, dev test for DevSecOps, and all that's kind of contained in there. We're going to stick with cyber resiliency, but that's kind of Cohesity in a nutshell, if you will. All right, so I said there was going to be a couple of statistics. We're not going to read every single one of these. There's a couple in here that are really important. This is 2024. There is a 2025 version out, but I don't use it till the end of the year because it continually keeps getting updated and such. But I will tell you this, the numbers aren't looking any better, unfortunately. I'm kind of waiting for the tide to turn and we start moving in the opposite direction. So I think this was like 7,200 companies. This is Sophos. 59% of those organizations, by the way, this includes public sector, so state, local, federal, the whole nine. 59% of those companies said that they experienced just a ransomware attack last year, right? That's not a wiper. That's not some other destructive cyber attack. That's not stealing people's personal information, all the other types of cyber attacks that we go through, just destructive, or in this case, specifically ransomware, which is really kind of the leading one. So that's 2 out of 3 organizations. Now, I'm sure they run the gamut from not too bad to absolutely catastrophic. The other thing in here that I wanted to point out was that attackers are going after their backups. They know they're not going to be able to extract money from you. They can't extort you in another way if they can destroy your means of recovery. Okay, so 94. Guess what? State and local, it's even worse. It's 98% of attacks resulted in data encryption out of those, as opposed to 70%, this third number. And then, of course, we already know it's extremely expensive to recover from these events. And that's why I think it's really important to draw a distinction between these 3. We're trying to achieve business resiliency, and there's other types of resiliency, identity resiliency, which also falls into this category. But we're just going to talk about data and cyber, right? This is where the confusion I see in our organizations comes about. Like you said, Bill or Jack, I can't remember which one, where they've just basically taken a DR or a COOP plan and kind of adopted it into a cyber response plan. And as you're going to see here, that's not the case, right? We need to start thinking of cyber resiliency as something wholly different. I wrote in a paper recently that cyber resiliency is a part of cybersecurity, right? But cybersecurity is not cyber resiliency, right? It's the other end. It's the end that we don't see much, and we don't have to practice very often. All right. The other thing that we're seeing within the and this is enterprise and public sector. I've never once talked to a customer afterwards, because oftentimes, customers are coming to us after, or maybe even in the middle of an attack where they're having a very hard time recovering. And I've never heard one person in cybersecurity or in the infrastructure side of secondary data that has not said, it was way worse than I thought it would be. And that's usually because of the things that we're not expecting. Do you have the phone list, who to call in legal, who to call in PR? Those are things that they didn't think of. Are your doors still going to open? Are your key cards still going to work? It can affect a lot more than just, my email, got hit by ransomware or something along those lines. And so through all the experience that we've seen, we've come up that it's usually about 12 times worse. And that was actually from an RTO perspective. This customer basically went through the death loop of 12, or actually more than 12 times. I think the average is 12. Those that believe the beautiful lie that they can just do the DR thing where they take what's, their last clean copy and put that back into production. The difficulty there is the adversary is still in. You haven't figured out how they're there. You haven't determined, was it a compromised credentials? Was it a vulnerability or an unknown vulnerability? Was it, how did they elevate privileges? How did they maintain persistence? You didn't get it to any of that, right? So they're still there, and they basically just redetonate again, maybe 6 hours, 12 hours later, maybe immediately, because you haven't, actually done any cleansing.
Yeah, one of the ways we see that is Marlon, is that customers who believe that that the first step to a cyber recovery is, I'm just going to restore from my snapshots that I've got on my own, on maybe a storage array that's in production, and right. and sure, you could do that, but you can't believe any of that. As we talked about earlier, you can't believe any of that secure. And so if you just keep looping back through snapshots, hoping to find something that isn't encrypted, I know you're going to talk about dwell time, but that's really the challenge is you don't really, until the cyber team gets involved, nobody knows how long the dwell time has been. And so how far back do I have to go? Right.
They don't even know. Yeah, exactly. Not just the dwell time. They don't know what systems they're in. Well, I guess to a certain degree they do if they're being encrypted. There's another thing too, is let's draw the distinction here is ransomware is horrible, but there's other horrible things that can be done to you, especially on the public sector side. While definitely state and local, we're seeing, some are willing to pay the ransom. On the federal side, which I also cover, they're probably not going to pay the ransom, right? So to them, even if they were hit by ransomware, it's the equivalent of a wiper, right? If it gets to everything. Right. And so, and remember, there's also different reasons for adversaries. Some are money motivated, others are ideologically or state sponsored motivated. So, we can't just assume that everything
It's
kind of
not about
falls
the
into
money,
one
it's about
bag.
the
Yeah,
disruption.
right. Destroying a capability. And we are also seeing on the federal side and also critical infrastructure side of the house, them just getting in and just trying to maintain extremely long time persistence because they're stealing information or they want that persistence for some other day. But sometimes on their way out, they'll detonate some sort of destructive cyber attack. So, just beware. So going back to something that was said earlier, there's two teams involved here when it comes to cyber resiliency. There's a cybersecurity team that spend all their day, every day, doing normal incident response, patching all the cybersecurity stuff, right? Looking at logs, trying to find the bad guys. Are they in? All that good stuff. And then there's the infrastructure side of the house. And we've kind of left it that way for a really long time. And the reason why was, to your point, or what was said earlier, recovery was a DR thing, right? It was we're recovering from something bad. Johnny deleted a VM or a file, or we were hit by a hurricane or something along those lines. And so it was really just, reinstantiate the infrastructure or the data, get it up and running again. If I talk to a cybersecurity team about any of the things that are on the screen right now, or like resiliency models and the frameworks and stuff, they're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. If I talk to an infrastructure person, maybe not so much, right? They might, right? But probably not to the same depth, right? So we're missing a common lexicon between these two groups. One is mandated to lock data away for something tragic that might happen, and the other team is looking for the adversary, trying to get them out, keep them out. And so we needed to come up with a framework that basically created that common lexicon between the two sides, and that's this maturity model, right? So it aligns with, actually, let me go back one. It aligns with everything the cybersecurity team, as you see here, right? Aligns with all of these, but puts it in a way that kind of shows that while cybersecurity, the left-hand side of the framework is all about maximums, right? Maximum capability response, maximum threat detection, maximum this, right? We want the best of everything. The resiliency side is the world of minimums. I cannot be allowed to be pushed beyond a certain point, or I will not be able to recover. So, what are those minimums, and what are the minimum capabilities that we need to be able to have a minimum response capability, a recovery capability, and a minimum viable organization? So, we're going to go through these really quickly, each one of them, because I want to be cognizant of Jack's time, so he has time to talk about this as well. One, we have tons of data. It's all over the place. It's in the cloud, it's in SaaS, it's in a data center, it's in a closet, right? So we have sometimes thousands of data sources, right? But I also see organizations basically backing them up maybe across 5 or 6 different products, right? And this is for a variety of reasons. Maybe they bought this one because it's really good with this particular database, or they did this because it's really good in the cloud, right? The problem there is then you have different security postures across all of these. It's very hard to maintain multiple products, right? And also governance across those products. Why aren't we finding a best in breed that can take care of the entire swath of data across my entire organization, regardless of what it is or where it lives, and then be able to provide maximum security capability to that, or cyber resiliency capability to it? And now I'm managing one system with one set of governance, and I can see all of my security policy in one place, and I get all my reporting in one place, all my policies, and it's AI powered. Next, once we get our head around all the data and we get it under single governance, right, we need to ensure to, as close to 100% as possible, that our backups are going to survive a cyber attack. Remember, they're going after them, right? And that's what we see oftentimes is, other backup solutions, they're getting to them and they're destroying them, right? Or they're encrypting them, or they're erasing them, or they're just destroying the system to the point where they're basically unrecoverable. So you need something that's employing not only the, zero trust capabilities like MFA, separation of duties, RBAC, ABAC, all those things, but then also follow methodologies like 3211 or 30-30-30+1. Make sure it's immutable, data lock, and then one thing that we've added to, which is a multi-person authentication for some of the higher level administrative things. Like you wouldn't want somebody to be able to elevate themselves to administrator, right? We can make it so that in things like that, multiple people would actually have to agree to that before it goes And then lastly, what we're going to talk about a little bit later with 1111 is make sure you're employing some sort of vault, right? This is your last line of defense. Also, a lot of us have compliance requirements. It's where you put that long-term data so that you can make sure that you meet compliance requirements in the longer term. 3, use this environment as a supplementary or a secondary area where you're doing threat scanning, threat hunting, ecosystem integrations with the SOC. That's another thing. If we're going to say that this is firmly in both camps, both the infrastructure side and the security side, we need to have two-way integrations and partnerships with third parties. But we also need to be scanning for ransomware, anomalies, entropy, all of those things so that we can try to find them before they detonate. Maybe we can circumvent even having to go through a recovery. And I think somebody said, the easiest one is the one you don't have to do, right? These are the data security alliances. So organizations like 1111, but then the things that you also see in your SOC. If you're not using, a half a dozen of these other organizations, I would be very surprised, right? Because these are the best in breed in each one of those security domains, if you will, right? Make sure that you're actually sharing information both between the infrastructure side and these to further make yourself even more able to detect the bad guys or the adversaries before they actually do something. Okay. Number 4, we're not doing this enough. I go to organizations and they talk about, yeah, we do tabletops and we do them every 6 months or something along those lines. I look at that as when I was in high school and I was playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's basically a role-playing game, right? This is what happens. This is what I do. The other thing too is if you're passing all of those, if you're doing like at the end, you're like, oh, we did a great job. I would encourage you to take a step back and go, okay, if we're winning all the time, and that's not what we're seeing in the news, what are we not thinking of, right? What is the adversary going to do to me, right? Put somebody on the team in charge of trying to trip you up. You should be much happier if you fail and the next time you actually succeed because you get past the thing, right? But if you're not throwing things in there, you're doing yourself a disservice, right? This is not
this is an area, Marlon, where I, without naming any customers by name, we definitely see that, and it starts with the DR testing and probably the same in CR. The test is somewhat designed to not fail.
right.
If you know what I mean,
This is,
because no one wants to have a failed DR test. They want to be able to check the box, and
right.
and so you create scenarios where they seem realistic, but even if you aren't trying to, you may bend reality so that that thing would be okay. Like I'll test the thing that I know I can recover that has a reasonable RPO, RTO, and we're going to do it once a year, and then we're going to check off that if this works, everything else should work because we don't have time to do the real testing, right? And that's really dangerous, I think.
Yeah, and I would encourage just along those exact same lines, and I've heard every excuse in the book as to the reason why we don't have an IRE, we're actually not practicing doing it. I've heard every single excuse. Those excuses will fly out the window after the very first time you go through one of these, right? Tabletops are not enough. Every 6 months is probably not frequent enough. You need to actually be practicing, and I'm not going to take Jack's thunder because I have a feeling he's going to talk about that. Same thing with digital jump bag. Orchestration and clean room. These are the things that you need to employ. Jack, you're going to cover those probably, just saying. All right, so I will leave that to you. But what Jack is going to talk about and what we've developed together is the process that you have to go through and the minimum viable response that you need to be able to accomplish and the capabilities you'll need to do that. So I'll just leave that to Jack. All right, last is reduce your risk from theft. Right. I've walked into organizations and they're like, yeah, we were attacked, but we don't necessarily know what they got to. In fact, we don't really necessarily know where all the sensitive data is that we have. And, it's all over the place. We know where a lot of it is, but we don't know where the stuff is that we don't know about, kind of thing. And so in those situations, to protect themselves, their risk exposure is so high that they have to assume everything was gotten to. Right. And that is not a comfortable place, to be in. And we've seen that, right? 52 million people get identity protection from X company because they don't know who was actually compromised, right? They'd have to assume everyone was in those particular instances. So why aren't we using this area to do data classification, to figure out where the unprotected data is? A lot of organizations, VMs are made every day. Data is made every day. Is it actually being backed up? Is there an automated process to make sure that data is being pulled into the fold and backed up, right?
And even more dangerously, data gets I'll just call it forked on a daily basis for new purposes.
Yeah.
It is the AI engagement that a customer's going through where they basically forked or copied off a bunch of data to work on AI. It's the same data that you would otherwise want to protect, but now it may not be subject to any of the same data protection or security issue or security requirements that the real copy of that data was, right? Because it's
Mhm.
just for testing or just for AI.
Right, right. But it might actually still contain information that would be
Exactly.
valuable to somebody,
Yep.
but we're not looking at it the same way because
Yep.
we cloned a database for dev test or something, and now it's just sitting out there completely unprotected. Another piece here. Look for partnerships, and you're going to hear this from Jack as well. We don't look to just sell technology to an organization. We have something called CERT, right? And this is a rapid response team that comes with the support agreement. Okay.
Mhm.
So if you have the support and you end up getting attacked, we're here in your corner. You call us and we will help walk you through this process to find the right data, to get that data into a clean room. Look for partnerships is really the most important part here. And lastly, to employ this, there is a much larger or more in-depth version of this presentation to go into, and we can walk you through the cyclical process to bring your organization from being basically data resilient to truly cyber resilient and be able to survive anything that gets thrown at you. And with that, I will stop sharing, Jack.
Thank
There we
you,
go.
Marlon. Jack's like you set it up for me. That's great. But that is much of what we are seeing, and I know you guys are seeing it too because we work together on customer opportunities. Right? Is I don't want to call it a false sense of security, but something to that effect, right? Where even in customers who believe they're doing the right thing for their organizations, that
Yeah.
that they are that they may not be as comfortable as they would like to be, or they believe they are, right? Just because some of those things that you talked about are just being bypassed because it has to be or it's easy.
Yeah, I just want to kind of double click on that with something that you said earlier. So we do something, and I think we might be talking about it a little bit later, called the ransomware workshop, which really kind of puts the player, if you will, it's not really a tabletop, but into an artificial pressure cooker, so they can kind of see not only what it's like to actually go through a ransomware negotiation, but then the things that they never thought of, like the legal ramifications, the regulatory ramifications of actually paying a ransom or not paying a ransom, all those good things.
Mhm.
And at the beginning of those, sometimes we give a questionnaire. And when they fill it out, we tell them, nope, you hold on to it. And at the end, we ask them, because they grade themselves, right, on it. Did you grade yourself better than you really are? Like, and so once they realize almost every single time, I think you said 83%, Jack, I would say almost 100% of the time, it's or 90 something, they think they're doing a lot better than they really are. And some actually, are the other direction, a small percentage. They're behind where they think that they are. They come out of it going, you know what? We have immutability. We have all the things you're talking about. I think we're pretty good. All right. So I'll turn it
Yep.
over to you, Jack.
Well,
Yeah.
the
Well,
fun
I mean,
thing. Oh, good,
so
Bill.
sorry, Jack. I was saying one of the things that we really love about this joint partnership is, and Marlon touched on it, right? Is there's a lot of process that goes into being effectively cyber resilient. Things you may not have thought of as we've covered, but the challenge a lot of folks face is they really even if they can see it, they're still stuck on this idea like I don't know how to finish it because I have my data copies. Maybe I'm already a Cohesity customer and I'm doing all the right things I've got the copies in places, right? But a copy of data is somewhat worthless without some way to rehydrate it into IT services, right? And that's really the I think the power of that 1111 brings to this
Yeah.
equation is no one really at this point, even for DR, wants to build out parallel infrastructure all over again because
Right.
those types of passed, right?
Yep.
where you build an offsite copy of everything you own and every piece of infrastructure you have, and you hope you never have to use it because that's a horrible waste of an organization's capital. But
Mhm.
but it's still needed. So Jack, I'll kind of let you grab a hold of this and kind of explain
Yep.
how 1111 fixes that serious issue.
Absolutely appreciate that, Bill. And just to tie up on what Marlon was saying, that 83% of people saying they were unconfident, that was not as part of an exercise. That was them just unsolicited asked. I completely agree with that 100% when they're actually asked further follow-up questions. So much like Marlon, I'll be brief on the 1111 story, but I want y'all to know in terms of what we provide, we're a cloud service provider. We're VMware's largest privately held cloud service provider. So when Bill says that we can help connect the dots and actually empower you to have secondary environments or archive or the infrastructure and expertise to make everything that Marlon so eloquently talked about earlier a reality for you, that's really where we fit into the gap here. And I know we talked about some stats already, but there were just some things that, much like Marlon showed some stats to me, are staggering, right? I think we all know, as Marlon was saying, that organizations have had cyber attacks, but was staggering to me out of this 1,000 organization survey we did last month was the number of reinfections or multiple attacks that organizations faced as well. When you look at the statistics here, over 55% of people said they had 2 to 5 attacks, and those are the ones, again, unsolicited, provide this information. So pretty scary indeed. To complement what Bill was saying a moment ago, though, a lot of organizations that I talk to or that my sales and channel teams talk to, I think understand where these gaps are. I mentioned earlier that 83% of people said, hey, I've got a gap. But a lot of companies and a lot of organizations, especially in the public sector space, say, how am I going to make the budget I'm already trying to account for all this as well and make all this a reality? And that's where we see a lot of organizations have challenges of where do I find the budget to make this happen? Bill teed that up a moment ago, and we'll talk about that shortly. And then also the expertise and training required to actually follow through on this piece of it. Both Marlon and I have talked at length about it's not just a matter of having things in place, but actually testing it, validating it, and improving. And again, we'll talk about that in a moment too, all critical elements. And last but not least, I think the great thing about it is of organizations that have gaps, a lot of them said, hey, we are leaning in further on this. We realize that there's gaps. We want to make improvement on it. So again, work with Bill, the IT partners team, and really lean in here to see where you can make a difference on it. With that being said, I want to paint the picture a little bit and say, what can we help with to complement the amazing technical capabilities of Cohesity at the end of the day? And really, it's kind of what Bill was saying a moment ago. A lot of organizations we work with want to do better at this, but they're stuck with the challenge here, which is, hey, maybe they've tried the cloud, or maybe they want to do this, but a secondary environment is cost prohibitive, right? And as many of y'all know, there have been a lot of changes on the licensing side of the equation that have dramatically made a secondary site even more cost prohibitive. Minimum number of sockets, renewal fees, all those things at the end of the day.
That's an understatement, Jack. Just,
Yeah. Anything you want to add there, Bill?
no, I was just going to say I don't think we have a customer who hasn't said, you know what, I'd really like to give Broadcom some more money.
But at the end of the day, I think a lot of organizations, Broadcom's had a massive share of the market for good reason. Or I should say the VMware piece did,
Right.
because of the great capabilities, the expertise. A lot of people I've worked with have built their IT careers and success on the platform. So not a lot of people that I've talked to have woken up and said, you know, I don't like the technology, but a lot of them have looked for, I want better predictability and I want a better option to maintain the capabilities I have. And to your point, Bill, that's exactly where 1111 complements your team, the Cohesity team, of saying, hey, whether it's the primary environment, and we're Cohesity powered in our primary environments as well, that global shot I showed a moment ago, when customers run production with us, Cohesity powers our advanced backups for production. But when organizations look at us for disaster recovery, we ultimately are saying, hey, don't build out the infrastructure of a secondary site. Don't license and do the VMware licensing as a secondary site. Again, largest VMware privately held provider out there. We include all the Broadcom licensing, all the infrastructure. And as Marlon was talking about before, of the layers, in many cases, we reduce spend down, whether it's the cyber vault going down 45% over a customer trying to go out and do it themselves, or that secondary site replacing or removing that secondary infrastructure altogether. That's where we really fit. And as Marlon was going through all the capabilities Cohesity has, again, there's so many amazing things it can do where we are as an organization is to provide that complementary approach. So for CyberVault, our organization has the ability to provide roughly $8 a terabyte, the ability to do long-term cyber vault capabilities. Cohesity has amazing capabilities. Their Cloud Archive v2 and cyber vault capabilities keep it secure, immutable, encrypted, but also can reduce the amount of data or storage space required to keep long-term compliant archive. We fully support that. We just make it very, very cost effective to do so. We'll talk about this here in just a moment, but a really big thing why we're on the a webinar today is our cyber recovery capabilities. As Bill mentioned a moment ago, where we see a lot of organizations really struggle is with the infrastructure and expertise of having a secondary environment, making it cost effective, and as Marlon said many times, making it built for the purpose that the organization is trying to provide, which in this case is cyber recovery and cyber resilience. And then last but not least, we know a lot of organizations know they need this, but I like to say a lot of organizations know they need cyber resilience to stay in business, but most people aren't in the business of providing cyber resilience. There is trickery, there is expertise required. So that's really where 1111 fits in. Our goal is to say, hey, if you need that secondary environment, what if we can make it as cost effective as working with your organization to understand how much storage you need for the secondary site, and the CPU, RAM, and everything else needed for recovery is on demand. We remove most of the cost hurdles for most organizations, and we package it in a really simple way. Whereas Bill was saying, if you've already worked with the IT partners organization or Cohesity directly to have Cohesity on-prem, we can easily expand your environment into ours, simply charge monthly for the storage required to replicate securely to our environment, but then during a test, an event, a DR event, or a cyber clean room event, which we'll talk more about in a moment, you have access to on-demand compute resources where you're not paying for them unless you need them. And then last, but certainly not least, we have organizations that, believe it or not, have failed over or come to us and then realize because of the health of their original environment, they need to fail over for a long period of time or a permanent basis. And so we offer the ability to have a customer become a permanent production environment, still powered by Cohesity technology after they fail over.
That's a
Bill, Marlon, anything
kind of
to add,
important
please?
point, Jack, about the sometimes the duration of the failover is underappreciated, because depending on how the cyber event occurred and exactly what needs to be investigated, you might not have access to production infrastructure on-prem for a week, a month. Maybe it could be much longer than you expect, right? And so having the ability, that really think is the power of the 1111 part of this partnership, is the ability to power that those operations for an organization for as short or as long as necessary,
Yep.
and maybe failback occurs, and as you noted, sometimes it doesn't, because the appreciation is like, I don't have to come back for certain workloads, maybe even I can stay where I am, right? But this particular diagram is really one of the powerful ones, we think, is everybody might be perfect on the left-hand side. They might have great backups, but if the only place you put a backup copy is, and I don't mean to disparage them in any way, is a public cloud or even one of the storage only type clouds, that's interesting in that you do start to fill out the model of 3211, right? But they're not really set up to run your workloads in the event of either a DR or a CR event. So your first step in that process has to be, I got to drag that data someplace that I can run it. And that just creates a run book that is deeper and longer, and it extends the recovery of services, and it's a bit of we think it's a bit of a struggle just to think that that's going to work. And we've talked to folks who have really think that I'm okay, I've got it in the cloud. It's just, are you in the right cloud for what actually needs to be done?
Yeah, I would just double click on, it really is, are you in the right place in the cloud, right? I see a lot of organizations kind of relying on native backup, right? Which is good for DR purposes, right? But to your point, right, it's not deduplicated, it's not immutable. There's a lot of things, but then also they really rely too much on that shared responsibility model, the contract, without really kind of understanding what their risk and their liability is, right? If you take a look, especially on the federal side, there's basically mandates that state you are responsible for the recoverability of the data ultimately, even in the shared responsibility model. So you're not as covered, right? It's great for DR. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the be all end all if you're looking for cyber resiliency.
And to complement what you're saying there, Marlon, one thing I love about the Cohesity story and the 1111 component as well is not all data has to be treated equally as well. And so the ability to go in and tier it out based on the requirements, the certification, the compliance elements as well. I love that about the Cohesity story of your policy-driven approach of being able to archive what should be archived, replicate what should be replicated, and at the end of the day, find the right price point and the right capabilities for it as well. And as Bill mentioned earlier on, that's really where 1111 is here to help is we could complement the cyber vault for the data that either needs the offsite copy long-term retention, which could be blended with other ones, and then add in the cyber recovery clean room DR capabilities for the workloads that do need that. And typically it's not all or nothing on any of them at the end of the day. Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about clean room because I know that Marlon teed it up earlier, and that certainly is a really important aspect of this. So let's go back to what we were saying before, right? Disaster recovery and clean room are different outcomes, different needs that organizations have, but so often organizations are forced to try to make it be both at the same time because that's what they have. They don't have enough infrastructure for both capabilities. So we were talking a moment ago about where 1111 could provide disaster recovery capabilities for Cohesity customers that are replicating to us. But a really key component is with the same replication to our infrastructure on our end, we also by default provide customers with clean room infrastructure on our end. So we by default have them set up with multiple isolated applications and network segments in our environment so that when they recover in a managed capacity, we can work the organization to understand what type of scenario they're looking to test or do recovery from, whether it's a DR or a cyber related event, and recover them in our environment in a completely isolated air gapped manner or one in which their end users have access depending on the scenario. So the wonderful thing about replicating with Cohesity to us is we can use a replication stream, securely keep it on our environment, but unlock new ways to replicate and recover that data at the end of the day. One thing, and I'll toss it back to you as well, Marlon, is with our clean room capabilities as well, they're fully in line with Cohesity's CERT team capabilities that you spoke about before as well, because at the end of the day, it's one thing to have a isolated copy to be able to spin up multiple points in time and instances from. It's another thing to have your cyber insurance teams, a DFIR team, the Cohesity team come in and assist with that piece. So Marlon, I know we were holding off on the clean room piece. I'd love to turn back over to you for a moment to talk more about the importance of some key things here as well.
Yeah. So a couple things. One, I again encourage everyone listening. How do I set up a clean room or how do I set up a isolated environment so that I can go through what we're describing here? Trying to figure that out after the problem has happened is, I see it all too often because I think in our heads we just go, well, maybe I'll do something in the cloud or maybe I've got some extra hardware or, just that is not, the way to be going about this. So clean room is also kind of multifaceted, and I don't know if you're going to talk about this, Jack, but the way we look at it is there is a lot of preparation, and we kind of talked about that in yours and in my presentations. Then there's a point where once the clean room is instantiated, something like this, and we're going to start to look for the bad guys in our applications, we have something called the minimum viable organization. You don't actually have to recover everything all at once. And this is going to be kind of handed over to the cybersecurity team, right? The incident response team, and maybe the others that you've contracted, like 1111 and our CERT team, right? Hand it over to them, and they're going to try to figure out, bring in try to find the IOCs. How did they get in? What vulnerabilities did they do? How did they live off the land? How did they get around my other security tooling? Because that's very common with Hunter Killer now. All right. And so once they figure that out, then they're going to put together a plan. This is how we mitigate those problems. Or maybe we're going to rebuild the system and we're going to transfer over the current data to that system, but we're going to kind of start with a fresh shell, right? And then once that happens, then we're going to hand it probably back over to the infrastructure team with maybe cybersecurity's help, but the IT team. And we're going to do the mitigation process. Once we're done with that, then we're going to back all that up again, and we're going to start to promote those into production. So it is a lot of things. The only thing that is the same, right, between DR and CR is that final step. Because in DR, I'm going to find my last good copy. I'm going to make sure that's running and working, and I'm then going to promote it into production. I know I'm overly simplifying things here. But yeah, so there's a lot more involved in that. And if you don't do those things, you're going to continually do them over and over and over again. And it's just going to cause it to be longer and longer and longer. And I feel like there, obviously a sense of urgency. We want to fix it and we want to fix it as fast as possible. But what is it? Slow as smooth, smooth as fast, right? That whole thing from the movie. I don't know if I got it right. Would you rather do it fast, 12 times or the right way once? Right.
Yeah, and your point earlier about if your first step in this process is scratching your head, going like, I got to figure out how to even start finding clean
Right.
room infrastructure, you're already pretty far behind the curve.
Yeah.
Yeah, great insights all around. And in the interest of time, I'll just make some final statements from an 1111 perspective. Our Cohesity offerings, when it comes to the replication and recovery pieces of it, are fully managed. And because of that, we really lean in when it comes to the pre-test documentation, identifying what an organization is trying to do, but also how it goes. One thing I want to lean in on, as well as Marlon made the suggestion, if you're testing and things aren't going wrong, maybe you should test some other things as well. One thing that I love about our process is the post-test report is really designed to say what didn't go well and how can we improve on it for next time as well. Because ultimately, you will find whether it's as simple as DR, and DR is not simple, but it can be more streamlined, or cyber. There's a lot of things to identify, to understand, and then to improve on over time as well. Bill, I'll probably turn it back over to you in terms of stopping my screen share, but I would say that time and time again, where we see some of the big value from an 1111 perspective, working with your organization, work with Cohesity, taking the amazing Cohesity capabilities, and really helping provide a path where maybe it's more tangible for them when it comes to those secondary sites and managed service capabilities. But certainly back to you, Bill, and thank you for the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, guys. We are close to the edge. We want to leave a few minutes at least to go through questions that may have popped up while we've been talking. I'll check with Marina on that in a moment. But um, one of the things that is, if it wasn't really made clear from what Jack was just going through, was not only is there a somewhat infinite amount of capacity available inside the 1111 cloud from a storage standpoint, but the ability to basically subscribe to that compute. And even if it's just as a matter of, I need to stand up DR for a few days or a week while we are recovering back on prem, whether you saw the disaster coming or not. But the model being a subscription model means that it's extremely budget friendly to get a lot more capability than you could probably envision doing if you were having to invest in the infrastructure, invest in the licensing, invest in the people, invest in the consulting services around building run books and keeping them up to date for DR. We didn't even touch on the idea that even a customer who says they have a great run book, if you really push the issue on, like, well, when's the last time it got updated? Like, well, I don't know, last time we ran a DR test. Well, I'm sure nothing's changed in the environment since the last time we ran a DR test. So keeping all that available and in a subscription form is really pretty powerful, which is kind of why we love the 1111 relationship is that we like to say finish it, right? But you really help us finish it for customers, right? Which is I've done all the things I need to do around selecting great backup and data protection platforms through Cohesity. I have maybe I have a well thought out DR and CR internal program, and maybe I am even well integrated with my cyber team as an infrastructure team, would be amazing next time we find one of those. But being able to finish it with the actual capability of infrastructure on demand that isn't, as you noted, Marlon, like, well, that's the thing that we'll figure out when we get to that point. Like, we'll just call up our vendor and order a bunch of infrastructure. Said no one, because
Right.
when will that show up?
Right.
So it really helps us complete that picture, right? So but thanks to both you guys for kind of covering through this. Marina, is there anything in the question Q&A window that I can't quite see it, so I'll have to rely on you if there is anything.
Yeah, of course. We've got one that's come in. So the question is, we're dealing with a lot of legacy systems and tight budget constraints. What would you say is the most realistic first steps we can take to improve our cyber recovery posture without having to overhaul everything at once?
Sure, that's
I
a good question, Marlon. I'll go ahead and grab that.
Yeah, so not an easy question. All right. first, hopefully you've gone through and you've done all the risk mitigation, risk management, all that kind of stuff. Determine what are your most critical apps. Like, what do you need? So your tier ones, right? Maybe the top end of your tier twos. Start with those. And remember what I said earlier about, cybersecurity being the maximum of everything and resiliency being, the minimum. I can't go below this minimum. At the very least, get your tier one to the point of everything that we just described and being able to test it, practice it. 1111, us, immutability, data lock, quorum, vaulting, right? At least in your tier one, right? And then reevaluate on a yearly basis and start to fold in tier two, right? And also ways to reduce the cost, right? Deduplicating, less storage, all those types of things, right? But start somewhere and get that to a minimum, right? And I'll turn it over to you, Jack.
Literally exact same thing, Marlon. I have a slide pulled up on start with the tiering piece, right? And that, going back to what I said earlier, I love about the Cohesity capabilities. It's the policy-based system where you can decide, should this be archived? Should this be replicated? Should it be both? How long do I keep it for? What does the data reduction story look like? Identify what's a vital data asset because of compliance requirements or value to your organization. Prioritize that first and then build everything else after that. But you've got a great ecosystem and tool set with Cohesity to be able to do that at the end of the day. It's phenomenal.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Marina, anything else in the queue that we want to answer, or
I think we are, oh, one more just came in. Let me, we'll sneak this one and it'll be our last
Sure.
one. So somebody said, this is great. It's uncovered some areas. I think we may have some gaps. What's the best way, to ensure that we aren't missing any other response steps?
Well, I think not to steal Marlon's thunder, but I think the earlier you mentioned that there's kind of a workshop for cyber resiliency that you guys put together that I think is pretty powerful because it isn't just like your traditional tabletop cyber resiliency type of event, right? It's designed, and you talked about it a little bit. It's designed to kind of, I don't know, make people a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, uncomfortable, but also, I think a lot of organizations, when they do it, they think it's a lot of fun. It's a couple of hours long.
Yep.
It really is eye-opening. A lot of things they didn't think of. Just like during a cyber incident, I've never heard anyone say, "Wow, that was easier than I thought it would be." It's always, it's way more difficult than I thought it would be. And it's just really kind of open eyes. There's no sales involved. This has, there's no pitching of any products. This is about, trying to think about what you're going to do in that particular situation where you might get hit by ransomware, right? Culminating at the end with, do you pay the ransom? Do you not pay the ransom? Going through a simulator that actually puts you into that, that pressure cooker, if you will. And yeah, it's both a little frightening and fun, just because it's not real. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe the outcome from something like that leads to maybe a joint conversation between our three organizations, just to kind of even drill further into some of the areas we've talked about today.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to it too, really good, because leadership buy-in on what we're trying to do, and also us trying to argue, a negative to our bosses saying, "Hey, we need this," and they're like, "What? Why? We've never been hit." Like right? Bring them with you. Right? This is not meant for just, the technical person. Bring them with you. Let them see it. It helps a lot of times. They're like, wait, this is a lot more important than I thought, right? Help get their buy-in.
Yeah, because they'll definitely be in the room if you actually had a real event, asking questions you'd really like to have answers for.
Right.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Marlon. Thank you, Jack, and Marina for hosting. I think that's all we've got today. If there are any questions, please reach out to any of us or any of your contacts with Cohesity or IT Partners or 1111, and let's maybe help you get to help you along the path of really having the cyber resiliency that you want for your organization, because we know everyone does.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.